Hey, hello, and welcome to the CISO IT podcast from Automox. I'm your host, Jason Kikta. It's great to have you back with us here in April. And this month, we're going to be talking about spring cleaning. And this is, it's one of my favorite topics because I feel like that whether you literally do it in the spring or whether you find another time of year, or you have certain things, sort of a staggered set of things throughout the year, that taking designated time to get things tidied up in your network, in your procedures, in your paperwork, always very much to your advantage. So, and what I mean by that is when we get into spring cleaning, right? Like, spring cleaning can be a designated day for your company to get caught up on patches. If you have to run a somewhat restrictive patch policy where, you maybe are mostly focused on the critical patches, or you have very limited windows, and these aren't, public facing production servers, but they're just internal to your company. It's good to every once in a while find a time to really get people caught up and do a focused effort on, let's get caught up on patches. I mean, obviously we would all prefer that we can do that on a regular ongoing cadence, but that's not always feasible, right? And that's not always, we as IT practitioners do not always get that level of influence or sway or priority across the business or the organization. So you do what you have to do, and this is a mechanism that can help you out, as well as there's other things that you can tidy up as well. There's back in the day, it was always the shared drive, right? That you'd have these shared drives that just became a monstrosity if you're on a Windows network, and most of us were, especially 10, 15 years ago. And these things would need a regular cleanup, because not just because they'd start to get full, but they would just become unnavigable. And you'd find staff members who were supposed to be backing up only critical files or using an external hard drive to back up their system, instead backing it all up to the shared drive, and bonus points if they were putting on there with improper permissions, so that anyone in the business could read sensitive documents. That was always I always felt like that was a continuous nightmare in the days of the so-called Active Directory style shared drives, and now that we're in more of a cloud era, those don't necessarily go away when you're using OneDrive or Google Drive. They're just structured a little bit differently, a little bit harder to overshare within the company, unless you have overly broad default permission set, but very easy for people to fill up their storage, have a bunch of stuff that's way beyond a retention lifespan. And that's a good thing, right? I view retention lifespans as extremely healthy things, right? You should have a few knowledge repositories like Confluence or SharePoint, where you are designated that as a knowledge repository, that information can live in there long term, preferably with people who are dedicated or have a dedicated piece of their time to maintaining those repositories. And then other things like a shared drive space, Slack messages, Teams messages, email, those should have retention time limits, because ultimately it piles up and it becomes something of a liability, right? Again, there's the first most practical example is that it's just hard to find things if there's too much in there, and then you have to pay for storage on top of it, potentially, depending on your pricing model. But then there's also the liability things of, it's not just, hey, we got sued and now there's discovery on it, and we said some things that maybe we regret, but really just simple practical things, like sometimes people drop keys or other sensitive data in there that they shouldn't. And so if you have retention time limits set, that's a way to just, it's not perfect, but it's a way to tidy up things, especially old things that people don't really track well, or it was here, we've moved it over there, it's much more secure now in this new designated repository or vault, but oh, by the way, it's still sitting around in 30 old Slack messages from 5 years ago or whatever. So that's another form of spring cleaning. I think scanning your network is definitely a form of spring cleaning. You never know what you're going to find there. You usually find some surprises. I always joke when I tell people about my time in the military that, it's hard for normal people to comprehend the scale of DoD networks. They're truly massive on a level that just is a little bit mind-boggling, especially because many parts of DoD has 2 or 3 duplicate networks to account for classified air gap networks, and DoD was running essentially the DARPA net, early TCP/IP, long before everyone else, and so it's had decades more than the rest of the world to build up cruft on these networks, because they were, they didn't have to change that much. And where someone at a large enterprise might lose track of, a number of machines or appliances, devices over the course of a year, the running gag was that DoD would lose track of entire networks. And I remember once doing an incident response on a network that got compromised. And it was very confusing to everyone because, depending on who you asked, between the network owner, the upstream provider, national level sensors, it was a DoD network. It wasn't a DoD network. It's our network, but we don't see any activity on it. And what it turned out was that the network owner had lost track of that network, because they were a network owner for many networks within a very large organization. They had lost track of that particular network for 12 years. 12 years they didn't know that network was sitting there. It was contractor maintained, and that contractor had many sites. The contractor knew it was there, but their security team didn't know it was there. Their IT team didn't know it was there, wasn't receiving patches. It was outside of most of their boundary defenses, and it was a bad day. It was a bad day. I someday I'll be able to go into more detail on that one, but it was a comedy of errors that did not feel very funny at the time. But scanning your network and using something to enumerate, again, everything from devices, and not just the device level, but operating systems, network shares, patch level of applications that are network exposed. Those are, that's something you'd like to ideally be doing it on an ongoing basis, but maybe your spring cleaning event is to try a different look angle, try a different tool, do a secondary check, just to tune and calibrate, if nothing else, right? Maybe your ongoing detection tooling and methodology is sufficient, but you just need a little bit of calibration. And so that's the time to kind of think about, what would we not be detecting? And if you do that exercise and you realize there's nothing to change, I don't think you're any the worse for it, right? And document it too, so that when you go back the next year, you're asking, you're at least not reinventing old questions. You might come up with new ones. You might suddenly think of something that hadn't occurred to you in years past, of, oh my goodness, we didn't check over here, we didn't check this net block. But you have the benefit of being able to go back and review what's been done to that point. And I think the one other one is compliance is, to me, a good driver, right? When we are coming up on our annual SOC 2 audit, that is always, the months leading up to that is always a great opportunity to especially go through on things, on documentation. Do we have all of our documentation up to date? Is it current? Does the flow make sense to an outsider? Do we have appropriate, formatting of logs, and we're able to walk the dog for the auditor and show them, demonstrate to them what they need to see to do the diligence that we pay them to do. And so, tying that in to an existing event, it is, it will increase your success level in the event, and it also makes it easy for it to remember, okay, we have SOC 2 every year at this time. And so back off a month, we're going to do this, back off 2 months, we're going to do this, back off 3 months, and these things are going to occur. And so you can sort of build that rhythm into your annual calendar so that it's not as big of a lift, right? And again, if you space it out enough to where there are a few things to do every month throughout the year, then it need not be a massive annual exercise. Even if you're hitting the particular thing once a year because that's the year, or that's the periodicity in which it needs to be addressed, you can break the work down to where it doesn't become overwhelming. You don't need dedicated people, and you get closer to that ideal, and that ideal that we all try to hopefully try to live at, which is being ready for an audit at any time for any reason, right? When you live in that place, and we try to live pretty close to it, life becomes very, very easy when you have a compliance event or when you do these annual cleanups, because it becomes fast. It becomes fast and smooth, and it's very generally predictable outcomes. And so if you do have something unusual or larger that you need to address, you have the time to do it because you're not doing a million small things that have fallen by the wayside. So, maybe more so than spring cleaning, think about pacing yourself and the timing, and that's what I'll leave you with today. So, thanks for tuning in this month, and I will see you in May. Until then, stay safe out there. Thanks.